I'm Jeffrey Colomb. This is Creative Studies. On this episode of Creative Studies, Iceberg Ahead. Is AI a possible Titanic scenario for the advertising industry? As the industry gathers for the annual Cannes Lions in Cannes, France, are there bigger existential issues on the horizon most are ignoring? Or is it more of a Star Wars scenario, where the empire of big tech strikes back, but we ultimately see the return of the small creative Jedi agency? We're speaking with freelance ad tech journalist Marty Swant on the topic.
Quiet please, quiet please. Creative Studies is in session. Creative Studies. Studying is different in the 21st century. Creative Studies with Jeffrey Colomb. Study Group on Creative Studies.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to another fine episode of Creative Topics and More Impacting the Creative Class. I'm Jeffrey Colomb, your host for topics at the intersection of marketing, technology, people, and popular culture. This episode, we're joined by Marty Swant, who wrote a piece that says AI may loom as iceberg for the advertising industry recently in the New York Times. For those of us who've seen it all, this is a possible remix of Just Pivot to Video that could lead to large tech hoovering up all the data on creative ideas they can in a quest to rid the need for creative agencies. Now, why do this? The industry has always had a frenemy model the past 20 years. Agencies need the platforms and networks to reach audiences, and big tech now needs the data and content to train their machine learning LLMs. Is the once advertising industrial complex faced with larger issues of being replaced, much like Napster destroyed the record label model? I discuss this and more with freelance journalist Marty Swant, who covers all things at the intersection of advertising and technology. I wrote this piece on Cannes Lions for DealBook, really around the sort of the dichotomy that the industry is facing. Do you want to tell our viewers really what the themes are about in the piece?
Yeah, sure. So essentially, it's interesting. I've covered this intersection of AI and advertising for the last decade, going back to a lot of stuff that IBM was doing a decade ago with a lot of natural language processing and whatnot. And as we know, the generative AI boom the last 3 years is really, on the one hand, caused a lot of people to be interested in what technology can do. On the other hand, people wondering if it'll stick, if it won't. But we've really, the last year or so, really the last 6 months, have seen this maturation of the whole industry and the scaling a lot of this stuff too. And so it was really looking at that question going into Cannes, obviously a big celebration of innovation and creativity, looking at the question of, okay, what are advertising agencies doing both to celebrate, adopt, and also invest in the technology? But there's this broader existential question kind of both below the surface and I think bubbling above it. Will this displace agencies? And how are different agencies trying to embrace it while also not being displaced by it?
I mean, that is the $100 million question. Do we think it will displace agencies? The big theme that I'm seeing this week from Cannes is that this is like a year of disruption. I sort of laugh at that, wondering like where some of these people have been the last decade. But, what are you seeing out there? You've covered the space of advertising and tech for quite a bit of time.
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I know like last year at Cannes, 12% of the awards had some form of use of AI in the submissions at least. So I think that's an interesting benchmark. I mean, it's too soon to know what that number is going to be this year. But I think it's interesting because on the one hand, we've seen a lot of brands testing certain things. In some ways, those creative campaigns have been either celebrated or in some cases kind of canned or criticized in some ways too. If we think back to, the template ones, whether it's stuff with Coca-Cola and Toys R Us and Puma have done some really interesting stuff with their agencies, but they've also in some ways been criticized for the uncanny valley nature of some of these things. Not those in particular, but in general. But I think what's interesting is you have people that want to use it, but at the same time, I think you have this undercurrent of people wondering, are agencies accidentally giving away too much control of the creative idea process to the platforms themselves? Agencies will say, no, we're not really. It's there's a lot to be excited about with the innovation, and it's a tool, and they're clients are still going to need us. But I wonder, I mean, when the platforms have all of this data, the performance data for what works, what doesn't for a lot of this, AI generated ad stuff, like how quickly will they just not even need an agency? Because they're training off the best ideas.
Yeah, I mean, thinking of training, you bring up a good point. Could we see something where you have companies say, run your ad campaigns with us, basically create all your interesting ideas. And a lot of these agencies are really just training machine learning to then be utilized in sort of a open marketplace later. Then you sort of have, I guess, maybe a lot of these agencies saying, wait, we were maybe, I don't want to say the term duped, but the wool was pulled over our eyes and we've given away all of our best ideas and now we're really not in business. I mean, could you see that being maybe the case here with what's playing out?
Yeah, that's exactly what I've been wondering for quite a while now. And just because even the last decade, they're called walled gardens for a reason, right? And and there's so much data that and agents are constantly wanting to get more data from the platforms in terms of performance and measuring all these things. I wonder what data will the platforms keep that they're not necessarily telling the agencies about or the clients about, and some of that might be stuff that's obvious that they want. Other times there might be a lot of data exhaust that the platforms are able to use to train their own models that agencies have no idea about. And so that's what I'm wondering is, and I've asked some agencies, are they adding in certain things to the terms of the contracts to prevent this? And some people say, like, well, the cat's out of the bag. They already have enough. Like, it's not much we can really prevent against. But also they own the pipes. So it's even if they say that the platforms say they're not going to train it on these tools, they're not going to use their tools to train on creative. How are agencies really going to trust that? Because we've seen with the Google antitrust cases even as well, there have been some things that happened that people didn't know about for years.
Yeah. Now you've been in this space for a while. You're a freelance journalist. What's on your radar that you're looking to maybe write or investigate next? I'm always fascinated by, what journalists are looking to sort of cover, especially in the ad tech space, because I don't know, we don't have enough voices like yours who are really looking into these things. So what's on your radar that you think is something you're going to go maybe research or investigate next?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'll give some more themes so I don't give away too much in terms of any, maybe storylines down the road. But I think a few things. I think on the one hand, for years now, we've heard so much about, the potential of this tech, and some of it's warranted in terms of there are some really neat creative ideas that people are doing. For example, this year at Cannes, Gobi Silverstein and Partners is screening their trailer for a 2-minute film that was using VO2 from Google to take an old Dolly screenplay that was never created back in 1937, which, it's funny, at the time it was seen as too surreal and too crazy even for the Marx Brothers, who, Dolly actually initially made the idea for, but they made that film into a trailer that's being screened at Cannes. So you're seeing these really cool creative ideas. What I think would be interesting, whether it's with that kind of stuff or other stuff, is everyone sees the potential. They see the end result of what's possible, the creative ideas, what technology can do. But I think what's been missing is a lot of the middle of the sausage making and looking at, how workflows are changing. How are these things actually set up? Because it's not good enough just for somebody to put in a prompt and you're not going to get something. That's really where the agencies, I think, will still thrive, is the creative ideas and actually using these tools to build whole new commercials, to really think differently about content. So I don't think it's as easy as it might seem to replace these things, but I think the workflow stuff is really interesting and how these technologies actually do create new ideas. I also think there's a lot to be discovered around the data side of this, like the ad tech side of things, whether it's you're looking at the curation side of things that's been popular around brand safety or targeting, that's become more popular with what Scope 3 has been doing and Mobian's been doing. But I think there's as we know from ad tech, there's a lot of data that isn't effective and isn't really helpful. So it's what kind of uses that will play a role in the creative, and what will play a role in other parts.
I mean, the big thing I think another question I have for you is marketers now have to think about all these different areas, but also the impact of AI on it. So a really boring area for a long time was search, because it's like, well, search works this way. Now that's undergoing a massive sort of disruption, for a lack of a better term. So a lot of discussions this week on how AI will enable that. Then you have retail media. You have sort of the bottom of the funnel and how people are going to, buy things. Yet you have a lot of discussions around, well, product pages will become highly relevant because that's what's going to actually feed all the information. And you may actually have a reverse where instead of going to a retailer, you're going direct to these pages where this information is. I mean, how much is marketing really having to adapt to just like all this change, or what I would call future shock at once? Is this sustainable, or are we in for sort of an existential crisis?
Now, when you say sustainable, you're thinking of just the attention is sustainable, or is the business model sustainable?
Is the business model sustainable for all the things that marketers really have to do now in this environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, because it seems like like I said, there's so many things being disrupted at the same time. I think there seems to be it's a hard thing to prioritize. What do you actually think ahead on when you have so many immediate needs you're also having to deal with? And like I said, disruption of search. What does that mean for, marketers down the road, retailers? I mean, I went to a dinner with like 15 different marketers and AI companies last week, and a lot of them had no idea what this is going to mean for their business yet, or that some of them are worried that it might disrupt marketing entirely. Even people making the tech are wondering what'll be most appealing in terms of use cases for this. So I don't know. It's like, I feel like that we're at this deer in the headlights moment where there's so many things changing at once, and people don't know what to spend their time on, in terms of what do they build, what do they buy, how do you even vet certain tools? Because when your day is full of immediate needs, how do you actually think about the future?
Yeah, that's a good one. So speaking of the future, what is a future prediction that you have in terms of where the industry is headed? If we had to put on a futurist cap and I said, hey, what will things look like 1 year from now? Like, what will we be talking about in June of 2026?
It's a good question. It's funny because usually I'm on the other end of this, the journalist asking for people's hot takes and predictions. So it's, so it's interesting having to be in the same role. I think a couple things that I've been wondering for a while now, and to see like where this goes. But I think one of those questions is around, I mean, it's a little different than this piece of it, but what does it mean for information flows? And what does it mean for truth, really, too? It goes beyond just the advertising side of things, but for media as well. And what's the role of advertising in that? We've seen, there have been so many examples of ads, like political ads on different platforms, that are ways that a lot of bad actors use to get around maybe some other filters and whatnot when it comes to targeted ads. So what'll be the role in generative AI for political information, for example, and political advertising? We have not seen, like, I know that a lot of the platforms have said they're going to add in certain guardrails around, having labels, like nutrition labels, watermarks for AI-generated content. But I mean, I don't know about you, but my entire feed, especially on, say, like Instagram, for example, is full of AI-generated videos that are not disclosed. And so that's something I'm wondering about. And I think along those same lines, I wonder if AI-generated content will become the new UGC. I mean, it's already UGC by nature, but just like before, tell me if you agree with this or not, but I feel like a decade ago, well, farther back even than that, but did people expect that UGC would be as ubiquitous and as scaled as it is now?
No. In fact, I think what's fascinating is to see UGC take up not a majority, but it's grown significantly from where it was, let's say 5 years ago. I think 5 years ago, it was under 15% of media buys. Now I think I read something like it's over 35%. That means that pie is only going to grow if that momentum or that trajectory stays on course. And we know that people like creator or UGC driven content. So I don't see that train slowing down anytime soon.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. 'Cause, it was interesting. WPP last week in their mid-year report, they actually mentioned that creators are actually bringing in, I forget the actual stat, but if I remember right, it's more revenue right now than traditional media, which is interesting. It's the first time they've actually eclipsed that. And to me, I think the creator economy is already very well established. It doesn't feel like it's anything new, but other people say, well, it hasn't scaled yet. So it's interesting that we see this thing that's scaled still to some feel like it hasn't scaled yet. And so it's it just, to your point, it's just gonna make it a lot easier for creators to make a lot more content. And then one other prediction, I guess, to make on this is more on the ad tech side of things again too, but what's going to happen with agentic browsing, agentic shopping? I mean, that's got creates a whole new blind spots and also all new white space for both users and shoppers and advertisers. I mean, if I'm, let's say, like Google with their Mariner browser, is that going to be, when it goes browsing on my behalf, is it going to say like, this is Marty's bot looking for things for Marty? Is it going to have some sort of targeting or identity resolution thing there? And will that be a risk for privacy, or will it be a new form of wasted ad dollars? It's hard to know, but I think that's a whole other space that, as it scales, it could be really just uncharted territory for media revenue, for advertising spend, and for just kind of consumer needs too.
There's a lot to ponder. Marty Swant, freelance journalist. Make sure you check out his latest piece in the New York Times. We'll get you back on a future episode to talk about a lot more. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me. There's plenty more to talk about.
I'm Jeffrey Cologne for Creative Studies. I'll catch you next time.
Creative Studies with Jeffrey Cologne.